Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In Plato's dialogue, the Euthyphro, one of the main characters is, as usual, Socrates, but the other one is this man who the dialogue is named after, Euthyphro, and they're both there to carry out some legal business. Socrates has to defend himself against charges of impiety and corrupting the young. Euthyphro, as it's going to turn out, is there to prosecute. So he's not there to defend, he's on the opposing side. And we're going to get a very interesting story, even account, some reasoning about why he's there, despite it being, you might say, especially from the perspective of, Greek religion and politics and family life, very counterintuitive, even wrong that he should be there. So Socrates is going to ask him, what's your case? Are you prosecuting or defending? And Euthyphro says, prosecuting. And then Socrates, well, okay, who are you prosecuting? And Euthyphro says, one who I'm thought to be insane to be attacking. And Socrates says at first, oh, is it somebody with wings, like they can fly away from you? And Euthyphro says, no, he happens to be an old man, a very old man. And Socrates says, well, who is it? And Euthyphro says, my father. Now, that by itself would raise red flags for many people in ancient culture. It seems to be impious to be doing this sort of thing, even unjust. Your father has been taking care of you. If there's anybody you shouldn't be prosecuting, it's that guy. And so Socrates says, your father, my good friend. So Socrates knows Euthyphro's father. And he says, yep, that's it. Well, what is the complaint? What are you accusing him of? And Euthyphro says, murder. Phonos, the intentional killing of another person. So this is a capital crime. This is a very big matter. And we're going to see that there's already a big conflict of viewpoint on this. Socrates thinks it's odd. Euthyphro's father, understandably so, and it's sometimes translated as other relatives, oikoi, the people that could also be understood as like neighbors, the members of the household. They are angry, and it's in the singular, so it's really the father, aganakte. They've gotten angry with me, and they consider this lawsuit to be impious, on osion. So there's actually a couple terms that are going to be used for pious and impious in this, or, doing the right thing by the gods, things that the gods can actually get behind. So they probably, you could say, represent the opinion not just of people who are closely connected to Euthyphro. This is probably going to be a widespread opinion. Euthyphro, however, is not just going to claim that this is justified, that this is okay, permissible to do. He's going to make a very strong argument, strong in the sense of strong claims, that what he's doing is actually the right thing, the just thing, and it's the pious thing to do in these circumstances, and he will, in fact, provide some lines of reasoning intended to combat this. So before we look at those, we should look at the case as he represents it to Socrates. So Socrates is going to say, the man your father killed, was he a relative of yours? Of course he was. You would never prosecute your father for the death of anyone who is not related to you. We're going to come back to that in a moment. Euthyphro will say, it doesn't really matter. As a matter of fact, he was a farm laborer of mine, and the guy got drunk. He got angry at one of the domestics, again, one of the members of the household who's not an actual family member. And then the term that's being used there, he slit their throat. Sometimes it's actually translated as he butchered them. It means to cut the throat like you would with an animal. So we're talking about a murderer here who is doing so because they're drunk and angry. And what do you do with a person like that? So the father's approach to this might be seen as quite reasonable and just. Indeed, even pious, because he's going to send off to religious authorities. So the father has him bound, hand and feet, and then he throws him into a ditch. It literally says throws him into it. So, to keep him there. And then he sends off somebody to consult the religious authority because they're out there on a farm, so you got to go into town. And as it's going to turn out, by the time that the person sent off comes back with word about what they're supposed to do, it turns out to be kind of a moot point. And we actually don't find out what the religious authority said he should do, but we know that he's consulting the religious authority. So the murderer, the farm laborer, dies of exposure. He says that hunger, cold, and the shackles finished him before the messenger got back from visiting the seer. So that's why my father and my other kin are angry at me when I prosecute my father as a murderer. And Euthyphro is saying, well, okay, so he didn't go and butcher him the way that the murderer did to the other house member, but he did bring about his death. How did he do that? Why did his father act in such a way that he could be liable for murder? So Euthyphro is going to say he didn't pay attention to the man and he neglected him. Why? Because he was a murderer. And the two words there, oligore, made less of him, you could say, and didn't care for, didn't give him adequate attention. And mele, didn't give him the care that he should have had, even though he was a murderer. So that leads to this guy dying. And the father has a counter response that kind of makes sense. He didn't kill the man, and had he actually done it, the victim was himself a murderer. And for such a man, one doesn't have to have consideration. So they're saying this is extenuating circumstances. First of all, we didn't kill the guy. Second, even if the father did kill him, which he didn't, it would be okay because he's killing a murderer, right? So Euthyphro's not going to accept this line of reasoning. Instead, he's going to frame it in terms of piety. And it's interesting because what people tend to zero in on with these characters like Euthyphro, or we could think of other dialogues where somebody is going to give a bunch of examples and then Socrates will say, what I really want is a definition that covers all the cases. So we're moving from the particular to the universal, or at least more general. Euthyphro is actually getting quite general here, isn't he? He says it doesn't really matter who killed the other person. You have to prosecute them. It's the right thing to do, and we have to consider whether it was right or wrong for the person to kill, not who kills or is killed. So we're not supposed to make special exceptions for our family members. Why? Well, here's where the piety part comes in. It's not just about justice being impartial. He talks about pollution. So murdering another person, shedding blood, is viewed as polluting a household, an area, and the pollution is the same if you choose to knowingly associate with the murderer and you don't bring them to justice. So Euthyphro is saying, hey, it is my dad, but he did the wrong thing, and I have to prosecute him. This is the right thing for me to do. It would be wrong for me not to prosecute him, and that's where people are getting mixed up. Not only is it a matter of justice, but prosecuting the wrongdoer, whether it's murder, and he brings up a few other examples of, what you might prosecute somebody for as well. Prosecuting the wrongdoer is the holy thing. Not doing so is unholy. So it's unfortunate that it's his dad, and it's also unfortunate that his dad killed somebody or brought about the death or neglected him to lead to the death. You see all the differences there. Somebody who was himself a murderer, but it doesn't matter. As far as Euthyphro is considering the case, he's got to prosecute his father. To not do so would be impious. And he will bring up another important line of reasoning, the example that the gods themselves are providing, right? And interestingly, in ancient Greek mythology, well, you got this guy Zeus, who is, conceded to be the most excellent and just of the gods. But what does Zeus himself do? Well, he goes after his own father, Kronos. He binds him. He actually, along with Hera, participates in a ruse to get Kronos, who unjustly swallowed all of his other children, Zeus's brothers and sisters, to throw them up. They've been sitting in his stomach, right? So he takes action for the right reason against his own father, like Euthyphro is doing. And then we can add something even more to this that complicates it a bit further. Kronos himself castrated his own father, the originator god Uranus in the father's sky, who is a much more violent god than Kronos was, right? Because, as we move from the early gods to the Olympian gods, we get a kind of refinement going on. So, we could see this as, Zeus and Kronos are providing models to Euthyphro. We could also see it as, Euthyphro is like Zeus, and he is doing something to his father who did something to somebody else as well. So, these are providing models of how one ought to behave. It's pious to follow the example of the gods. Euthyphro is going to say, the Athenians are being inconsistent. They're cool with Zeus doing this. They're not cool with me doing it. What's up with that? And Socrates is going to ask Euthyphro, do you really believe all these stories about the gods doing all of these wild things with each other? So he gives us examples. Do you actually believe that war occurred among the gods? There were dreadful hatreds, battles, and all sorts of fearful things like that. What's your position, Euthyphro? And Euthyphro says, yeah, I not only believe those things, but I can tell you other stories about the gods that I'm certain will astonish you when you hear them. And Socrates says, yeah, another time, buddy. We don't need that right now. Point is, Euthyphro, and most of the people of Athens do believe in these stories. So it seems like there's perhaps a case for following the example of the gods and therefore behaving in a pious way by prosecuting his own father. So as we see, Euthyphro is not just a full of himself, stupid guy who hasn't thought about these things. He's actually given a lot of thought to these matters, and he does seem to be a bit conflicted. He realizes this is his father. He realizes that his father does have a case, but he's saying, well, there's other principles that override, what ordinarily would have gotten his dad off the hook. And I'm the one who has to do the unfortunate job of prosecuting my father for this crime of murder.